Hello and welcome to India Career Center, the one-stop podcast for students, professionals, parents and guardians. In every episode, we will try to deal with a current topic that needs expert advice related to career, career guidance and career mentoring. Please welcome your host, Dr. S.B. Mishra to the show and happy listening.
Sir, thank you so much to be part of this podcast and share your immense knowledge and glittering career highlights with young and aspiring students, and obviously professionals also across India and the world. So taking the conversation forward, I would like to ask you to take us through your early life, your childhood, your education, including IIT Delhi and IIM Ahmedabad days. And what are the lessons which young students listening to this conversation can take from your journey?
Well, thank you, SP, and it's great to be having a conversation with you. Thank you for inviting me. And since you mentioned students and maybe younger professionals, it's always inspiring to be able to speak with them, learn from them, and maybe have a dialogue together, because there's so much that one can learn, especially in this day and age. So I'm happy to be able to share whatever experience I've had. You know, when one looks back, the formative years for all of us have been crucial for shaping our own future. We don't realize it, but it's only when you reflect back do you actually see what it could be. So when you asked me this question, I actually reflected back, and you're right, there are lots of things that one learned. My earliest recollection of my schooling was at the Kendriya Vidyalaya at Avadi. Avadi is near Madras, Chennai, where India's first battle tank factory was being built, called the Vijayanta. And since my father was on a transferable job with the government, fairly early, I was packed off to a boarding school in the Shimla Hills near Kasauli at the age of 8 years. The school was co-educational. It encouraged holistic development of children, equal mix of academic, sports, hobbies, physical training, etc. Discipline was of a very high order, and a lot of our contemporaries from school would go to the armed forces. The lessons I learned, SP, since you asked, in a boarding school, you learn to fend for yourselves at a very, very young age. You live in dormitories, at least we lived in dormitories of about 35 students. We learned to live with other children, all from different backgrounds. Contact with parents was only via letters, 8 months of the year when we were in school. I think this served me and my co-friends very well, because later in life, coincidentally, my bosses were always 5,000 or 10,000 miles away, either in the USA or the UK. You had to take calls with your colleagues and take them and, at best get guidance from elsewhere. But fundamentally, you fended for yourself. I think the second learning was an unwritten code which is there in boarding schools, that you never tell your teacher if you have a problem. I know it's different now, but in our time, that was the case. You never wrote to your parents expressing any difficulty simply because they were too far away, and it was understood that we shouldn't bother our parents who were so far away. All matters then had to be resolved either within oneself or with your friends who were the same age. I mean, whether they were 8 years or 12 years or 13 years, you couldn't go to seniors either, but you had to resolve them. I think that was very, very important for us. The third is we had to participate in all activities. So the curriculum was holistic from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And the importance of extracurricular was therefore a part of us. Fourth, being a co-educational boarding schools, I think girls and boys were very comfortable with one another because everybody did everything and participated together. So gender stereotyping never really occurred to us. And I think that is extremely important. And fifth, and finally, from a school standpoint, our school motto was never given. And we kind of remembered it because it was in the hills. And since we did a lot of cross-country running, the last part was always climbing up a hill before you finished, you know. And I think that was something that you had to complete. There was no option. We also helped one another a lot. And therefore, teamwork became extremely important simply because we had to fend for ourselves. So our friends were our team, so to speak. I think somewhere it did get ingrained, and I think teamwork as a value is there right through life. I always have felt that teams deliver far more than individual brilliance. Yes, you need individual brilliance, but not at the cost of teamwork. Moving on to IIT Delhi, I think this was perhaps the best phase of my educational time spent, so to speak. Brilliant minds, but also talented sportsmen. There were also theater actors. There were people who wrote. So learning was absolutely continuous. I mean, if you look at specific lessons, SP, I think if one got the mix of academics and extracurricular right, the facilities were all provided in the IITs for the students to use. It just depends on how much we use them. So one's development could be so much more than pure academics. But we were there for the primary reasons of academic. And that's something you can't forget. Sometimes some of our friends did get carried away at times. But at academics, obviously, we had to be at a very high level over the 5 years. And I think what we started understanding was good, excellent, average. I think we started understanding these terms, and you could virtually decide where you wanted to be in anything. And obviously, most people would either be at good or excellent as far as possible. 2, but if you got the mix wrong, that your focus went away from, not entirely from academics, but not giving it the priority, which is the primary reason why we were there, then somewhere there was a compromise. And I think what we understood over there is, what does balance mean? And balance right through life. In every form, there has to be a balance, because there will be competing priorities, there'll be competing distractions, there'll be competing requirements, whether it's family or financial or in business as well. Third, and in this day and age, I think making a career out of a passion is possible. Yes. Perhaps we were very straitjacketed. There were limited options from a career standpoint. Okay. And it's best, I think, for young people if they can work and go with what gives them the biggest joy, where they can contribute the most, or where their passion lies. We observed friends who were very passionate for the liberal arts, simply going through the motions of an engineering degree. By the time of second or third year, they realized that they weren't interested. It's just that they were brilliant and they got in. But their passion was for the liberal arts, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we must follow our passion as well, because the options are there to make it a career as well. Moving on to IIM, I think the first year was the most challenging of our entire, at least my entire academic phase. And very clearly, the whole idea was to bring everybody to Mother Earth. If you thought you were too good, you realized that you weren't actually. So everybody was leveled in the first test, which was called the MSM1. I think it was called Mathematics and Statistics for Management. And pretty much, if you got 10 on 100, you'd maxed it. Well, many got 0. And these were all guys who'd come in through, well, they were at the top of whatever institution. It was pretty grounding. Okay, so you got 3 on 100, 4 on 100. You're pretty much okay. But it was a test for you. That can you take a major setback? It was important. The second was, I think it is ideal to do an MBA after 2 to 3 years of work experience. It was not mandatory, but of course, overseas it is mandatory. In India, it is not. But if one gets admission into IMA, then what do? You don't say no. The lesson really is there is no guarantee of getting in again 3 years later or 2 years later. So you just take the bird in hand and then you work through as best as you can. The second lesson, I think, also in the first year was that I was selected by the students' body to represent IIM A at the inter-IIM meet, which at that year was in IIM Calcutta. This would mean a week away from classes, quizzes, attendance, etc. And the college did not give any waiver for the fact that you were representing the college. You had to make a choice. And I decided to go. Many of my friends didn't, but some of us did. I think only 4 or 5 of us from the first year decided that we would go. And we lost out on the quizzes in that period. We lost out on class attendance, etc. But I think gaining experience is worth it. We also made a lot of friends because it was a 2.5-day journey from Ahmedabad to Calcutta by train. And they were mainly second-year students. So it was great. And some of them really became good friends. But I think gaining experience is important. And there will be a downside. The question is, how do you trade that balance? And I would take the same decision if given the option again. And the third, I think, was one of the great things, that the teaching in classrooms was by the case method. So theory books had to be learned outside the classroom. You were just told to read books, textbooks from page whatever to whatever for the next day's case study. What it taught you really was that there is no one approach. There is no one answer. There will be many options. If there was no option, there was no problem because you had to deal with it the way it was. Otherwise, you had to choose. And that's how the case method was so interesting in class, because on the same case, simultaneously in different classrooms, you could end up with different answers, depending on how the batch took it and how the teachers decided to guide you. You could be successful, therefore, in a case, regardless of which route you followed. And maybe you didn't end up at the same place either. So that's important in business, because theory is important, very important. But at the end of the day, you have to make your choices as you go along. So I think all 3 educational institutes, I mean, we have to thank also the government of India. These were subsidized educational institutions. We were extremely fortunate to have studied in them. But I think at the end of the day, we made friends for life. I think in all our educational institutes, we made friends for life. I think that is something that cannot be taken away. And maybe the 2 years of the pandemic have deprived our children from that. But again, to come from a thing like work from home, I think up to a point it's good. But at the end of the day, interaction with peers, seniors, subordinates, physical interaction is necessary. So best would be a hybrid model where there is a balance, and one makes friends and sorts issues out face to face. Back to you, SP.
Wow, I think a lot of inputs to take from there. I think first and foremost, you're taking the question towards your school. Today, that scenario seems to be impossible, actually. I mean, for somebody who is studying in a boarding school now, even if a small kid, depending on to communicate back with parents through letters for 8 months in a year is unthinkable now. I think it comes from a different era of times. But I think the learnings what you spoke about, obviously they are absolutely true even today's times, and they will remain relevant in all the learnings whatever you spoke across your school, the IITs as well as IIMs.
Yeah, I'd
Thank
only
you.
comment on that one thing where, now we have the facility of mobile phones. We want to remain in touch with our children, etc. The question is, how do you achieve that balance? The communication is available, must be utilized. At the end of the day, it is about achieving some kind of balance, which doesn't get intrusive either into the school or into the child's own growth process. That's pretty much it.
And a lot of it, don't you think, is also dependent on the environment as well as on the parents? Because ultimately, whatever a young person adapts is also dependent on the environment and a lot of it on the parents as well.
No, true. And parents, I think, more than anything else, especially in the early years, of course, there's peer pressure on students from their own classmates, etc. But at the end of the day, parents have a huge role to play in the early part of how much to let go and how much to pull the, kind of strings back. Again, there's no easy answer. It is for each parent to make that call.
I completely agree. Now, moving on, sir, in your initial 20 years of professional career, you walked across various industries like motorcycle industry, gensets, iron and steel to refrigeration, and rose from the level of management trainee to the level of managing director. Take us through this journey and also tell us how these changes across the various industry panned out for you. And again, what are the lessons for the young students and professionals who are listening to this conversation?
Yeah, it's a very overarching question, SP, and many of you, including yourself, have been I've been fortunate to have many of you as part of my colleagues in this journey. Again, as you mentioned, I've been fortunate to work in different industries. But if you look at it, all of them were under the broad umbrella of manufacturing. So each one of them that you've mentioned may be different, but still there was similarity. Now, most of my class fellows from both the IIT and IIM had either gone to the USA or overseas, eventually settled there, or chosen the up-and-coming sectors of those times, which were finance, banking, marketing, etc. My passion was manufacturing, and I am so pleased that I chose to remain there throughout my career. I think if you look at it from a lessons point of view, it varied from company to company. It also varied because one keeps growing as time moves on, so to speak. So if I were to look at the first one, it was an Indo-Japanese company. What I learned was an uncompromising approach to quality and to project commitments, or commitments in general, to time, to cost, to budgets, etc. I think at that time, quality was not something high on the priority of many of us in manufacturing in India. In fact, it wasn't for a long time. But these Indo-Japanese joint ventures that came in, I think many of us who were fortunate to start our careers, we therefore learned it very, very early, how important quality was, or how important time and cost commitments were. The other part was that quality had to be delivered through processes, not through inspection, not somebody standing over your shoulder and saying, you haven't done this right or wrong. The process dealt with it. And then there was an audit at the end of the day. So the process actually trusted you to only let go to the next stage if you, as a person in that workstation, had completed everything that was assigned to you. So I think that was important. I think the second part of this was the deep focus on ancillarization and the realization that your suppliers were only, or you could only be as good as your suppliers were, because quality came from there. The value addition that the OEM was adding was maybe 20-25%. 5,000 parts maybe came from different suppliers. So the supply base had to be strong, and therefore a lot of effort in working shoulder to shoulder with at least your strategic supply base. But in India, it was necessary to go to tier 3, tier 4 levels as well. And that's our duty. MSMEs is our duty. We had to support them. That was a big learning as well. The importance of ensuring that you were working hand in hand with your supply base on all aspects of manufacturing, obviously at the end of the day to deliver good quality. Training of people was in the ethos. So training was not, for me, not a revenue expense right through what I learned was, and right through when I was able to lead companies, training was an investment. Training of one's people was an investment that would pay back. So if there was a cutback that you had to make because of a downside in the business, one area that we always hesitated to prune, cut, no chance, prune, was training. Because this was the best time during a downturn would be to upskill your own colleagues, your own supply base, etc. Because you had time available and people's minds had to be occupied in a very constructive sense. Moving to steel and cement, this was large, this was scale, even a whole city being run. You actually got to understand the vision of those who had laid the foundations of such large organizations. I think it was complete. I mean, when you understand purpose, this was true purpose. When environment came in, when land acquisition came in, when the people who dwelled on the land for centuries, how do you involve them and bring them into the fact that they should have a stake in the path forward for industrial development? I think scale and size was mind-boggling, but vision was the first time I was really struck by it. The next one moved more into miniaturization of technology, where technology was being packed into, one of the products was a compressor. Immense amount of technology packed into a small dabba, so to speak, which you can't open for 25 years, which braves the voltage fluctuations with at that time could move from 140 to 280 volts or frequencies which were 50 hertz plus minus anything. And if a compressor fails, either your refrigerator goes or your air conditioning goes, and both of them cause a lot of noise in a household. Believe me, if either of these two fail, the lady of the house for a refrigerator and all the occupants in the summer are extremely happy. And there's only one moving part, it's only the compressor. So there's a amount of technology put around. And I had the opportunity to be able to turn around one of the units where we worked. So that was the first experience also of a turnaround at a fairly young age. But we learned from the mistakes that were made that needed the turnaround. So fortunately, I was there in both those processes. I think if I were to summarize the first part of what your question really was, that through these three industries, quality, technology, process, people, product. That's quite a lot, actually. But all of this in envisioning, and purpose at that point in time. Back to you, SP.
Great, sir. Each sentence of yours is a golden nugget. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will actually listen to each of this sentence very carefully and take the learnings out of it. Now, moving on, sir, I know you spoke about manufacturing as the overarching concept throughout your journey, but you have moved away from industrial refrigeration to the C industry. That's when I think from one leadership role, you moved on to another bigger leadership role in the C industry. and later on, of course, into the automobile industry at the highest level as well. And I have been part of one of them in the sea industry, where you drove actually a lot of transformation, which I have personally seen, and also you have driven across these industries yourself. So take us through this journey, and again, what are the lessons to take from them?
So SP, thanks again. The important thing is that we had the privilege of working with young professionals, middle-aged professionals, right through life. And I think they made it. I'm not going to talk of any one company, but for me, it was a continuum. I was fortunate to be a MD and CEO for over 2 decades. So it was a continuum, and therefore will not focus on any one industry or company. But there were some turning points, and I want to relate a story of a person where I talked about a turnaround in one of the companies. And, we, for whatever reason, an acquisition was made, and we were to now figure out how to integrate, turn around the acquisition, as well as lay the foundations and develop a brand new facility as well, all running simultaneously. We had no experience, and it was a young team that was put into this. But the turning point came is whatever we acquired was a running plant. And there was only one line in that plant that actually diligently did its work. 8 or 10 people, and they delivered to zero defect. And zero defect in those times was not even a word that was, well meant. I mean, people would smile if you said that this should be zero. But this line was delivering one component part in zero defect. And they were disciplined. Everything was in its place, something we called 5S. There was a place for everything, and every tool was in its place. Remarkable, really. Out of 1,500 people, 8 or 9 people were focused on this. What I learned from it is that I spent a lot of time with, and I'm changing the name of the person. Let's call him Praveen. Praveen actually hummed and smiled while he worked. And I think that is what drove the rest of the line as well to follow his example. So this was phenomenal, and everybody else was roaming around. I think average time of work was not very high, maybe 3 to 4 hours or something a day. Ashok or Praveen, or whatever we may call him, was blind. So he had no option but to have his tools in where he could find them time and time and time again, day after day after day. He had decided, I got to know him very well. He had decided that he would enjoy what he did through life. He was grateful that he had a job. Wow. Just imagine, gratitude that he had a job and he had a family to feed. We used his example and the line's example as a center of excellence to actually drive massive communication and then turn around and a whole groundswell of let's say, motivation, that this one person, if used in the right way, could do it. And then a new plant, training, retraining, all sorts of problems. But fundamentally, there was a mission at hand. And for me, that was the turning point. And Praveen was the one who provided that spark and the ignition to all of us. And this plant went on to be world-class. Early days, mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and competed with the best in the world. Now, when we come to other places and other times, youngsters have played a big role. When you look at youngsters, like yourselves in the early days, what did youngsters want? They wanted to compete with the best. And what does compete with the best is? Can we export? Can we play with the best? What is the pride the pride of making in India, the pride of being able to participate and actually see if we could match our professional skills with the professional skills of others who had earned reputations as companies, as countries, ahead of India in quality. So I think if we were to look at a few learnings overall during these 20 years of being an MD and CEO, I think one is an unwavering focus on the power and purpose and vision. The purpose could even be that we want to be the best in the world. We want to be able to export. And then unwavering focus on what the vision is, and then not consensus, but alignment. You've got to have alignment. You can, I mean, people can say, yes, we'll do it. But if your heart is not in it, it won't get done. And young people obviously play a big role in that. The second would be, I think, empathy. It's a much used word these days. But I think it's something that we were able to practice over a period of time. And empathy does not mean agreement. Empathy only means that I will strive to understand your point of view. And if I disagree, I will tell you, this is why I disagree, and we'll move on. But opportunity to speak and therefore willingness to listen is extremely important. The third was that during this period of whatever 2 decades, we've had 3 or 4 financial crises. No, we've had 3 or 4 crises. One was financial, the other could be a pandemic. There were different crises that comes. One could be only industry focused instead of world focused, etc. So we learned scenario planning. You couldn't have one scenario. Important to have 3 scenarios and keep developing on them, because there was no easy, straightforward path that could any longer be followed. The fourth was speed over precision, not in terms of product quality, but in terms of decision-making on data available. Data was never going to be now perfectly available, so there's no point holding on to it. You take your call and then correct as you move along. In my view, 80% of the decisions are reversible. So it's the best part is delegate those to colleagues who will take those calls, and all you have to do is to support them. Should a path change or something goes wrong, then give 100% support, because they can be reversed or they can be changed. So look at what is reversible, and by all means, take a call as early as possible. Remaining curious is going to be, I think that's something that perhaps we'll discuss as we go along as well, as to how do we remain, let's say, in this day and age, how do you actually remain relevant? And I think we'll talk about that. But adaptive intelligence, how do you use your intelligence by seeking inputs, getting different perspectives, and utilizing them for decision making? I think digital adoption has become so important that can you actually do it proactively? Can you actually, what is the main reason why customers come back to you? If it's service, then be proactive there and ensure that you use as much technology as possible in terms of real-time information. I've mentioned teamwork over individual brilliance. I'm not saying individual brilliance is not important, but never at the cost of teamwork. I think sustainability is again a word that maybe is utilized more, but what I would now do, if we were to set up, let's say, a new facility, and I'm talking only for the future, one extremely important target, it used to be cost and time targets, product targets. Now the target of the carbon footprint comes in. Cannot change a carbon footprint once it's set into position, especially if you're doing something new. So that is extremely important. And if you've decided to be, let's say, net zero, or at least within your facility, net zero, then you've got to design your facility accordingly. So carbon footprint comes in very early during the planning, project planning phase. And finally, customer has to be at the heart of everything we do. He is the reason, she is the reason for what we do. So don't ever do anything with the customer not at the heart of the decision-making process. Back to you, SP.
Absolutely. Great. Again, a lot of insights, a lot of learning. I just have two questions. The first question is about, you mentioned alignment versus consensus. Would you like to give little more elaboration on that? That's one. And number two, I have seen you in one of the industry, and I know that whatever you did, the way you drove those organizations, um, I'm sure those were the right things to do at that point of time. But if you were to again go back in the time, and you were to change something which you thought you could have done, I mean, hindsight, probably you thought you would have actually taken a different route. Is there any situation like that? If you can tell about these two subjects.
SP, great questions. In consensus is agreement. It's mere agreement. The question is, then where's the emotion? I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it, what does purpose drive you? Purpose drives you emotionally. Alignment is let's say a step in moving in that direction. Alignment is when you are convinced, and sometimes with your heart in it as well, and I hope fully with your heart in it as well, that this is the right way to go. Or even if you're not convinced that this is what perhaps I'll have to believe is the right way to go, and we can judge it when it's achieved. So consensus to me is at a lower level than alignment. Alignment brings in emotion and heart into play as well. On your second question, it's a tough one, and while I'm sure there could be different views, etc., but I'll leave it at that, because again, we had wonderful times with some wonderful people to, over a long period of time, to be able to always move forward. Yes, there would be challenges, there would be setbacks, but never did we ever look back and say that this is what we should have done. And I remain with that. We'll keep looking forward, keep going ahead, and learn from the past, but then don't worry too much about it, because the future ahead is going to be far more exciting.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So going on, now that you're part of several government committees, non-government boards, organizations, both for non-profit as well as profit domains. So through these organizations, how you're impacting the lives of people in general, and if you have any specific thing which you're trying to impact the youth in particular as well.
So I think, SP, thanks for asking that question. And, while one would say one should be doing a lot of this right through life, especially in our country where there's so much opportunity to contribute in many, many ways. I think at least I've, and many of us have gone through phases where, at least I'm in this phase where opportunity in any way to impart experience, knowledge in as nice a way as possible would be extremely joyful. And that's what I think I'd like to spend the next few years doing. Again, these are opportunities that came my way. I was not aware, and whenever I say that I'm involved with the foundation that that says, do not forget leprosy. People say, we thought leprosy was eradicated. And we can say it's eradicated because we've actually, as a society, maybe moved them out of our sight. But that doesn't mean it's eradicated. So there's so much that can be done, and I'm learning. And also, if we can do anything to bring joy to people who have had leprosy, but more important, their children, who get stigmatized for no reason at all. I mean, it's absolutely, it can be curable. Children live with their parents who have leprosy. They don't have it. Why do we do it? So the motto is, do not forget leprosy, amongst a lot of other initiatives that both government and society are taking. And can we mainstream them? So it's both of learning and then seeing if there's opportunity to mainstream as much as possible. They're as capable as anybody else. I also have the pleasure and possibility of having participated in CII for almost 3 decades, and now I lead what is called the Mission on Technology, Innovation and Research. And India as a country doesn't do enough. In the next 25 years, our competitiveness is going to be determined of how much research we can do as a country, but very importantly, how much of it can be done by academic institutions and industry put together. And we are not joined as the hips. The question is, can we be joined at the hips so that research in academia moves to commercialization in industry? It happens in other parts of the world. And let's say that's something which is extremely interesting, challenging, and important. And the other part is, chairing a committee which is called Future Mobility. And you know that what mobility is going through, and this is something that I'm more familiar with as well. We've got virtually every energy mix that can possibly be, whether it's CNG, LNG, electric vehicles, hydrogen in the future. It is an interesting mix. And therefore, and then you've got aggregators, you've got a technology people, everybody in the mix. The question is, how do you as a stakeholder, whether it's a citizen or it's government or it is the OEM or it's the component manufacturer or it's the technology firm, how do you actually come together to make sure that everybody is moving in the right direction? So there are several actually, all of us have these opportunities to contribute and even write and share experiences that the more we do, the more, I think, joyful it makes us.
Yeah, we are actually, moving quite fast in terms of adapting to the new. My next question is rather in that direction. The way I see it, by 2030, the world is going to be a very different world. In fact, I think right now we are in the decade of disruptions and transformations. And the way I see it is that most of the traditional jobs, for example, if there are 100 jobs in a particular organization, by 2030, we might actually see that reduced to maybe 20-30 for that particular organization. And rest of the 70-80 jobs might get contracted out or might be automated or might be outsourced. So in such a scenario, how do you see and how do you actually advise the young students and professionals to prepare for such a future, which is actually totally unknown?
So SP and great, we will all have to do crystal ball gazing, each one of us, and then actually this is going to change year on year. As parents, the fundamental value system does not change, and that gets ingrained from the home. So I don't think that should undergo any change, because that is your grounding. That's the basis of which you are as a person. So that doesn't change. And the next thing parents do, at least, and so well at least in our middle class society, is their aspiration for a good education for their children, after which then the children have to fly. So then it moves to the next stage of what is the education system. And that we've been saying needs to reform for a long time, and now it needs to reform even more. The question is then, what are we trying to look for in the outcome that a student comes out with? I think the learning objectives have to be far broader than they were. We had very, very specific learning objectives, and I believe it's maybe a little broader now, but a very, very, very narrow comparatively to what is required. And when you're talking of 2030, we're talking of young kids in the next 8-9 years. These are children who is going to be finishing school, who are now going into school. I mean, this is the reality of today. So I think one ability to what they call critical thinking. We should be able to think for ourselves critically. Therefore, make sure that the children, ourselves means as students, be able to do that. The second is curiosity. I think that's through life. Always be looking to learn, unlearn, relearn, skill, upskill. But that flexibility has to be brought in at an early stage, and the learning then will continue. I'm just saying these must be ingrained. And the third is the ability to be able to communicate. I think we have to give as much option and freedom to our students to be able to communicate and learn the importance of communication. So I would say maybe critical thinking, communication, curiosity would be the 3 C's that can come out of an education system. Then, of course, you would have what subjects do you want to study and be capable. We need to now work as industry backwards into academia. So as you move into areas of higher learning, the newer areas need to be taught early. I mean, when you're looking at mobility itself, looking at sustainability, these are going to be extremely important. And the methodology would be the AIs, the Industry 4.0, etc., to be able to inculcate them in the subjects of tomorrow and continue to adapt. So I think the future students will be a highly adaptive workforce, flexible workforce. When I look at employers, for example, today, how do we give flexibility to our people in all aspects, whether it's the hybrid way of working? I don't think we're going to go back to pre-pandemic era, except maybe in very specific areas. But otherwise, how do we give flexibility to learn, grow, and be employable? I think some CEOs, or we've got to reflect that we may talk about purpose and vision, but when it comes to a downturn and a crunch, we let people go. So that then, in a way, destroys the confidence and the trust that one places in the organization that one works in. So then you start questioning that what was this teamwork, what was this camaraderie that we were all talking about when come a downturn and we are the first people who get laid off. That's the last action, the very last action, and it should never be knee-jerk. It has to be the most difficult action for a CEO to take, if at all he or she takes it.
I know, I think in the recent times, the layoffs have been so much and the ripple effect of that is possibly going to be across many industries. So that is something we'll watch and see what happens. But you're right. I think by 2030, the organizational culture, how it is going to be shaping up is difficult to predict right now, because the composition of workforce is going to be very complex. It's going to be mix of some permanent employees, there'll be some contracted employees, and there could be some contracted employees who work for a longer period of time. So it's going to be a new challenge for the CEO and for the HR manager to really create a organizational culture with these kind of complex composite system.
No, you're right, SP, and you mentioned it in the first part of your question, actually, that the subcontracting is going to be a major part, because a lot of activities will get so. But at the end of the day, leadership is leadership. I mean, and people trust leaders. People trust leaders who are authentic. People trust leaders who over a period of time are empathetic. People trust leaders who over a long period of time indicate that they're willing to listen. And obviously with the goal in mind. That will not change. And that, I believe, is the real moot point, that it is going to boil down to leadership. And otherwise, yes, as you say, the various structures under which we operate will change. Leadership quality has to be of a very high order.
So before we move on, the last one I want to ask you is about your recommendation for any books or podcasts or movies, etc., for our viewers and listeners.
SP, thanks. No, I hope people watch this one for starters. That'll be nice. But when I really look at it, no, I haven't watched many podcasts really. But when I look at a movie, I'm going to be very boring and old-fashioned. The Godfather, which we saw in the 70s when I was not even in my teens, or just about entering my teens. Our learning over there is, and that has stayed with us, and I've obviously watched it again and again, is that your word is what you have to offer. Maybe it's not the best analogy, not be the best example, but your word is what you have to offer. And if you have to change, then be transparent and open about it. And also try and explain the circumstances that have made you change your own word. I think then that comes down to trust and leadership. From books, I think I must take off from where, you've spoken in your last, your very last question, and you talked about 2030. I think there's some nice books coming of the next decade. The one that I really enjoyed reading was 2030 by Mauro Guillen. I don't know whether I've got the spelling correct, but it essentially talks about how today's biggest trends will collide and reshape the future of everything. And so there's lots to learn. There will be no easy answers, but it's talking about the future. It's talking about 2030. And then obviously then your own mind starts racing and maybe developing your own ideas. I think because we in the automobile industry were affected very deeply by lack of availability of semiconductors. So the chip war by Chris Miller, which has come out very recently, it's really the fight for the world's most critical technology. And the geopolitics being as unstable as it is so important to be Atmanirbhar. And I'm so pleased that the government of India is taking big steps to try and set up an ecosystem. It's a massive ecosystem that has to be set up for making chips. Not easy, but at least we're going to make a very big, let's say, effort in that direction. And finally, a book that I'm currently reading is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it really talks about tiny changes coming out with remarkable results. And that applies to sustainability as well. That applies to everything. If I can make a tiny change, then collectively we can achieve a remarkable result. So it applies right across the board. It's an interesting book as well. But yeah, this is what I'm kind of reading at the moment. Not much of movies that I can really recommend. I wish there were more. Back to you, SP.
Yeah, the last one, sir. You talked about the chip war by Chris Miller. So this is about the critical technology. I think in similar way, we are all moving towards EV, electric vehicle, but I think we are overly dependent still on China as major part of the supplies. So that would be also an interesting area to explore, and possibly for India, lot to do in that area as well.
No, I think in every area, I think for whatever reason, the world is playing catch up. We are not the only one, but we are playing catch up as well. So the question now is, and if I had to go a little technical on government policy, I think the advantage now of having a PLI scheme for automobiles and auto components, but only for the future technology. So it's not for IC. Well, it's not for IC engines which are run on conventional fuel, but run on the newer fuels or more eco-friendly fuels, but on electric vehicles, on hydrogen, for example. and coupled with the fact that the corporate tax now has been reduced to 15% for new manufacturing units, can be attractive. There's lots of work to be done on ease of doing business, especially in the States. But all of this, at least there is an attempt now to bring in manufacturing and technology as much. It will take time, SP. We have our challenges. We are democratic, where states are federally run. So there is a mechanism that will go. But the effort is being made. I think policy is robust now. It's up to industry also to step up and take those challenges.
Thank you. All the questions you elaborately answered, and each, as I mentioned earlier, I think each sentence has got a lot of golden nuggets. So, sir, it was fantastic as always talking to you. You have been a fascinating leader during my tenure in the industry, and so looking forward to that. Thank you so much for investing your time today and talking to us.
Thank you, SP. The answers are only as good as the questions that are asked. So you've done your homework well. And also remember that it's all our colleagues who've made all of us today. And therefore, my thanks in return to everybody who we've interacted with over a long journey. Thank you very much, SP.
Thank you so much.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. We sincerely wish you could take something from our conversation today and be able to apply it to your life in a positive way. We value your feedback. This can help us improve our future episodes. So share your thoughts to serve you better. If you want us to focus on a topic which you think is of importance, let us know. We will share our expertise in future episodes. So, see you soon with a new topic and help you in your career journey.